I am back and I have a new lawnmower. I cannot believe it. I am so excited. And I didn't go to any of those local places because you know what? They don't know what they're talking about or what they're doing whatsoever. So forget about those local home builders, any of them. Lowe's, Home Depot, Menards, none of them I could go to. We have to go to somebody who specializes there. So I went to Wise Garden, Weizgar. I think it's DEN or maybe it's TN. Wine Garden. I'm not sure. Wise, Weiz though, locally. And I got myself. Well, I will tell you after I use it, but as a woman, I'm so excited because I, once again, have said I can't trust the contractors. Why? Because they are all in group think mode. And their group think mode is that the ends justifies the mean, and we want this last president back in there, and we have conservative values, and you must not. And it's so unheard of to have a liberal person also be a Christian and talk about morality. And the right wing and fascists are so not used to it that they break every rule, thinking that they somehow have the moral high ground. Just because that's what you heard doesn't make it true. Doesn't make it true. Let's go. So here we talked about large rewards, severe punishments versus small rewards, mild punishments, which is exactly what the communists were suggesting for long-term belief change, right? When you had other individuals, think about historically, who have you had that has given severe punishments, right? Have those individuals had long-term belief changes? No, of course not, right? So that's what that slide was about, if you remember. All right. Then the stats on advertising, the three components of social psychology. What do when we study think about it from a personality perspective, right? Any perspective, anything that you want to psychologically study, it doesn't matter. We can talk about morality. So study it with using the ABCs. We want to see if somebody behaves moral because that's the bottom line, right? So that's the B. But are they motivated by feelings of morality, right? Or are they motivated by, A, affect, or are they motivated by concepts of like judgments, right? Like rules. Are they motivated by rules? Cognition. Any topic in psychology, you could look at it from the ABCs, right? So here we are, groupthink. We are motivated by our feelings about the group and not feeling that we are isolated or left out of the group. Right? So we behave in ways that may not, and let's go to the C. Keep the ABCs in order, but we'll go to the C. So, and then we think like the group. We look at the cognitive signals of the way that the group dresses or talks or drives or behaves, right? And then we put those in our minds. So that's a cognitive, in order for us to behave like the group, right? So, ABCs. This was what we are talking about is how do we take a neutral stimulus like little Albert becoming afraid of the Santa Claus mask, the white puppy, the white rat. What else was it? Something else. I can't remember. Not a kitten. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Anyway, but the neutral stimulus, how is it that something that is neutral, that we're not afraid of, right? And we become afraid of that, right? How about fear of the dark? How does that happen? How does that fear of the dark happen? Are we born with the fear of the dark? Well, there probably likely is something to it, only because there's such an uncertainty that comes with the dark, right? But we've talked about this in spirituality as well, right? Using men, the word men as opposed to people or whatever. Men's behaviors are different in the shadows of the dark, right? In the dark of night. They're different than they are in the light of day, right? So, so conditioning those, so fear of the dark, psychologically, there's something to it, right? Likely there's psychologically something to it, but also there's an uncertainty that goes, well, the psychological component is uncertainty that goes along with it, right? There's an uncertainty that goes along with it, not necessarily an event that goes along with the dark, other than, right, sounds, noises, that creates greater uncertainty, right? But are we born with that? Darkness, is that darkness a neutral stimulus, right? I mean, how do you check that if we're born with it? What do? You look for the gene of fear? It doesn't exist. So when they tell you about that we have the entire genome, they're only talking about relative to physical attributes. What makes brown eyes brown? What makes somebody have Alzheimer's if it's genetically located, which it is, right? There is some genetic basis to it. We can find those people have a different genetic tendency, right? We don't know where that comes from, but we know that those people have a different genetic tendency, like autism. Where that little extra chromosome comes from, we don't know. Okay. Now, SFP. Let's not forget what SFP is. That is self-fulfilling prophecy. This is such an important concept. And although I explained everything on that slide there, I'm not sure whether or not you got the gist of it. And the gist of this is that teachers, when they believed these students were smart, they treated them differently in ways that literally increased their IQ by asking them more questions. They were simply told that these average students were smarter than average, and they gained 10, 20, and some of them even 30 points higher in their IQ scores. That's amazing. And what else is interesting is to suggest that IQ is so genetically based when we can clearly change your IQ points simply by inferring something that isn't even true. So IQ, your IQ is not, despite, so they tell you a lot of things, right? You know, believing in something spiritual is all myth, Bible is all myth, right? And they also tell you that IQ is genetically, does not change, and we know it does. They'll tell you all kinds of things, but we already know they tell you all kinds of things. Okay, so that's important in the group think, because we lead ourselves to believe certain things. Very easily we can lead ourselves to believe certain things. And here in the Barg, Chen, and Burroughs, which is where we actually left off, study, what we have here are 3 different experiments. And so there is a horizontal axis, which is like the horizon, right? So, and the horizontal axis has got our groupings. So you'll see the groupings along the horizontal axis in the first one, which says polite, neutral, or rude. Those are the groups: polite, neutral, or rude. And those are groups for what it says there is the priming condition. Priming means that individuals will get a cue. And the cue was either a polite cue, a neutral cue, or rude. And so often what they do is, and for these studies, what they did was, they did, for example, word searches. So I could do a word search, and the words are different words, right? Some of them are neutral, but some of them, but they're primarily rude words, like push or shove, right? Sneer or snarl, right? Disgust, okay? So, or gossip, okay? So I'm doing a word search, and there are these words, or there are polite words primarily in my word search. So it might be help, cooperate, teach, nurture, right? Polite words. And then what they did was they looked at how fast somebody interrupted. Is it how fast? Let me look at that just so I could see here. Yeah, percent, not how fast. Percent who interrupted. Yeah, I knew that scale would be wrong on how fast. So, percent who interrupted. And we can see that in the third column there of the first set of 3 columns there, that's looking at polite, neutral, or rude, the percent that interrupted. So then they had a conversation, and they had a conversation between 2 researchers. And they had to get on to the next whatever it was. How many of them, they had to give a message to the researcher. So somebody came in, give this message to the researcher. What percentage of individuals interrupted when they were primed with polite words, neutral words, or rude words? And what's interesting is that the effect of polite words as well, right? So that even made them more patient, didn't it? The neutral words. So polite words made people more patient. Rude words made people less patient, right? Than people who experienced neutral words. Let's look at that second set of graphs there. Now there in the second set, what they've got is they've got a white bar and a black bar and a white bar and a black bar. And let me actually look at that. Let me look at it a little bit closer over here, because that picture that you're seeing actually isn't a very good one. And so for this, what they had African Americans or whites. Caucasian is what they have there. And these what they did was they primed individuals with a cue that was a subliminal message. Now, a subliminal message is a message we get subconsciously. We don't know it's there. So it flashes up there, but it's not enough for our brain to pick it up, but our eyeballs did pick it up. All right, so a subliminal message didn't really register, but it did register here is where it did. All right, so they flash up either a Caucasian face or an African American face, and then they are given while they are doing a computer task, right? So there's a computer task that they have to do, and then they flash up, and they have difficulty completing the computer task. How much hostility did we see? So that's a dependent variable. So on the horizontal axis, we have the independent variable. That's our grouping variable. So our 2 groups we've got Caucasian or African American, and we have this done for people who were experimenters in the group. So they knew what the experiment was about, or individuals who are blind coding the hostility. So they had to code hostility is what they had to do. So we saw blind coders coded very similar to experimenters who knew what was going on, right? So hostility codes were similar, but more hostility for when it was subliminally flashed an African American face compared to a Caucasian face, white face, okay? So what we're seeing is that in the environment, we could have cues that are very small cues. I could be walking through a group of, or in a community of African Americans, and I am going to, for example, interpret their facial expressions more hostile. That would be a generalization of what they are finding out here in these studies. The next one is just 2 different experiments of the same thing. And what they have here is that they have a neutral stimuli is the priming condition, or elderly priming condition in that last set of boxes there. And so what does that mean? What they did again here was they gave word searches, but in this one they had names that or words that were associated with elderly people, like, for example, gray or walker, slow, 95, whatever. So all these words that are related to elderly people. And then the dependent variable that is in the vertical, on the vertical axis, says walking time back to the elevator. So when these individuals in the third set of bar graphs there, third study that was there, that they did these 3 different studies and then reported them all in one journal article, all in one article. And there you can see experiment A and experiment B all the way down in this one here, right? And that one right there, you've got experiment A and B, where you have got the elderly, so primed with elderly words, that's in the black column there, or primed with neutral words in the white columns there and there, all right? And we see then what did they do? They timed their walk back to the elevator. Timing their walk back to the elevator. And what do we see? We see that it took them longer to walk to the elevator when they were primed with elderly words. So what we see and are exposed to in our environment literally affects our behavior. If I am surrounded by elderly people, I walk slower. I act older. Maybe I don't think as clearly. Many studies have been done, but this set of studies that Barg did, this set of studies, this is a classic set of studies that he did to show how priming, how cues, what we see in our environment can affect our rudeness, our politeness, can affect our interpretations of hostility, and can even affect our behavior like walking. Okay, now the last slide that I have there is what is called the fundamental attribution error. And so what we have there is we have individuals who are writing either a pro-Castro speech or an anti-Castro speech. And so this is done, and I don't have the date up there, and I should have the date. This is a classic study that was done in the 1960s or 70s is what it was done. And oh my gosh, I cannot believe I don't have the name up there. Fundamental attribution error. Who is the fundamental attribution error? Fessinger, fundamental attribution error. And that was done actually in the 1950s is when that was done by Fessinger. And so what he was doing was he had pro-Castro and anti-Castro speeches. Note that, again, we have more studies that are the outcome of World War II. These are studies that were done in communism, all right? So studies that were done in communism, again, outcomes of this kind of communist thinking. Same kind of ideas that we have here. Castro was a communist, and Castro was a communist leader for Cuba, all right? And we had bad relationships with Cuba. Castro actually had missiles, and this was the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s when President Kennedy was president, had actually nuclear missiles from Russia pointed at us as close as Cuba. So this was a crisis to have Cuban missiles pointed at us. So we didn't like Castro, all right? So here in this study, we have individuals who are either giving a pro-Castro speech or an anti-Castro speech. That's one of the independent variables. You could see that's the difference in colors. Pro-Castro, purple, anti-Castro speeches, orange. All right? I'll blow that up a little bit so you can see it again. And then we have whether or not they chose to give that speech or it was assigned. All right? So you could see that there's a purple and a orange for they chose to give that speech, a pro-Castro speech or an anti-Castro speech. And then you could see that it was assigned to them. They had to do it. All right? And then what they were looking at is how much people believed that the people who were giving the speech believed what they were saying. And this is where the fundamental attribution error comes in. Those are the numbers there to the right if you want to see the numbers, which are less important, or they're not less important. They are the foundation for the bar graph. It is only important when we know that the speech was assigned, but yet we still believe that people who gave a pro-Castro speech believed what they were saying. Now remember, this is a highly emotional, volatile issue because we're talking about the height of communism. And McCarthy has got the hearings where he is accusing people of the McCarthy hearings, accusing people of being communist. We've got the Cold War starting, and we've got World War II ending. So there is this real fear, and we've got the Cuban Missile Crisis where Cuba's got the missiles pointed at us. So we've got this real fear in the spread of communism. And now we've got people who are giving pro-communist, pro-Castro speeches. How much do you think that they believed their speech, even when it was assigned? And that's the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is the belief that when we see the behaviors, that those behaviors are actually part of your personality. You really are pro-Castro. I really do believe it. Now, we see you made that error. You believe that they believe it, even though you know it was assigned. So you think it's part of their personality, this pro-speech. Let's think about this a little bit differently. Let's think about this fundamental attribution error with driving, all right? So we see that somebody got in a car accident. The fundamental attribution error is all of our likelihood. We are all more likely to think that person is a bad driver than we are to blame it on circumstances. Why? What do we see? We see that this person got in a car accident, but we don't know the reasons why. The fundamental attribution error says we are more likely to say it's due to personality when it is somebody else than we are to say it must have been a situation. Oh, I bet they had to swerve to miss something, that they're not a bad driver. We are more likely to say it's due to personality than we are to say that it's due to the situation, unless it's us. And then it's like, oh, well, I had to swerve to miss something. I'm not a bad driver. Oh, I don't gossip. I'm not a gossip. I just had to tell you that story, right? But it's not part of my personality. My personality isn't that I'm a gossip, right? My personality isn't that I am a bad cook. It just so happened that I burned dinner tonight because I was distracted with all the kids' homework. I'm a good cook, right? When it comes to us, the reasons why we make mistakes is because of the situation. But when it comes to other people, the reason they make mistakes is because of their personality. That's the fundamental attribution error. All right, so we're talking about concepts that are related to groupthink, like the propaganda, like the conditioning, like the self-fulfilling prophecy, like the fundamental attribution error. All of these phenomenon, psychological phenomenon, all of them contribute without our knowledge to groupthink? How do we break out of that cycle? How do we break out of that groupthink cycle? All right, I will be back here on Tuesday to talk more about breaking out of that cycle, because what are we talking about here? We're talking about a positive framework. How do we get a positive get a positive framework when all we're talking about is this group thing, following along, so much so that we are making lives traumatized. We're traumatizing children in order to follow along. How do we break out of that group think? I said it's by being an individual, right? So this is a positive framework for our group think. All right, we will be back here on Tuesday then to talk more about what Gina Perry has said about breaking out of this awful group think that they had going on in the Robbers Cave. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am here in the classroom, more specifically, this philosophical classroom. Why am I here? Because I'm a teacher. That's the reason why I'm here. Thanks for joining me. I will see you back here on Tuesday with the early bird classroom. All of my classrooms, I don't repeat information, but there is enough overlap that really makes what you're learning very, very rich. We haven't talked about some of these things in the early bird classroom. So don't miss it. Starting at 8, kind of, sort of.